In the summer of 2001, a young woman from Echo Canyon, Arizona, vanished without a trace, leaving her family, her friends, and an entire town in utter devastation. Her disappearance would haunt the town for 20 long years. No answers, no closure, just a painful mystery. But no one could have predicted the shocking truth that would finally emerge. Who was behind the disappearance of Teresa Vega? And what dark secret had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered? Teresa Vega was only 19, a young woman on the cusp of her future. The youngest of four siblings, Teresa was beloved by everyone who knew her. She wasn't just a daughter, a sister, or a friend. She was a light in the lives of those around her. Her smile, it was radiant, something that could brighten the darkest of days. She had dreams. She wanted to become a nurse, to help people, to make a difference. She had the kind of future that was filled with possibility. Echo Canyon was a small town, and everyone knew everyone else. And everyone knew Teresa. She was that kind of person, the one you couldn't help but love, the girl who went out of her way to lend a hand, the one who made you laugh when you didn't feel like smiling. But all that changed on the night of July 12th. That summer night seemed like any other. A birthday party, friends gathered, music and laughter filling the air. Teresa had been at the party, dancing with her friends, laughing along to the music. But as the night wore on, she promised to head home. Her parents would be waiting. She slipped into her red pickup truck and left the party, just as she had countless times before. But this time, she never came back. Her parents, Elena and Roberto, stayed up late, waiting for the familiar sound of the truck pulling into the driveway. The porch light outside their home stayed on, just like it always did when someone was waiting to come home. But as the minutes turned into hours, something wasn't right. The night grew darker, but there was no sign of Teresa. The porch light, still shining brightly, stood as a silent symbol of hope. But with each passing moment, that hope began to fade. The morning sun rose over Echo Canyon, a town now in turmoil. And still, no sign of Teresa, not a trace, not a clue. What happened to Teresa Vega? Where had she gone? And why was she gone? The town was left with only one question: why? Before I begin, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. I'd love to know just how far this story is reaching. As the clock continued to tick, the quiet panic in Teresa's home began to set in. It was just past midnight when the silence became unbearable. Elena Vega sat by the window, her eyes fixed on the road that led to their home, waiting for the familiar hum of Teresa's red pickup truck. The glow of the porch light was the only thing that illuminated the otherwise dark yard, but it stood as a beacon of hope, until that hope slowly began to fade. She'd been waiting for what felt like hours. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Could something have happened on her way back? Had she gotten into an accident? She couldn't stop imagining all the worst-case scenarios, but she tried to push those thoughts aside, clinging to the belief that her daughter was safe. She had to be. Elena stared at the road, refusing to believe that this wasn't just some small delay. Maybe Teresa had stopped to chat with someone, or maybe the truck had broken down. But then, as the minutes turned to hours, those comforting thoughts became harder to hold on to. Teresa always returned home on time. Always. Across the room, Roberto Vega, Teresa's father, stood by the front door, his hands gripping the phone tightly as he desperately tried to reach his daughter. His voice was calm when he called her phone, but inside his heart was pounding. He called again, then again. The line rang, but there was no answer. He hung up and dialed once more. Panic was creeping in, but Roberto tried to hold it back, convincing himself that Teresa had simply lost track of time. Maybe she was caught in a conversation. Maybe something had distracted her. But after hours of unanswered calls, Roberto knew something was wrong. His breathing grew shallow as he dialed the police, his voice barely audible as he reported Teresa missing. The operator on the other end of the line asked him questions about when Teresa had been last seen, where she was headed, what she was wearing. As he provided the details, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. His daughter wasn't coming home tonight. The officers told him they would dispatch a team to begin the search. But even as he heard their words, he couldn't shake the fear that had taken root in his heart. What if Teresa wasn't coming home at all? The police arrived shortly after, but there was no time to waste. The heat of the Arizona desert had already begun to take its toll as the sun set behind the distant mountains. Echo Canyon's small-town atmosphere was shattered as news of Teresa's disappearance spread quickly. The search was underway. Helicopters flew overhead, their whirring blades cutting through the still desert air. Officers and volunteers scoured the land, combing the canals and dry riverbeds for any sign of Teresa's truck. Tracking dogs barked as they sniffed the ground, while searchers walked in rows, scanning every inch of the desert floor. Every shrub, every rock, every piece of debris was inspected. But hours turned into days, and the more they searched, the more nothing turned up. No sign of Teresa's red pickup truck, no tire tracks, no footprints, no clues. The authorities initially focused their efforts on the area where Teresa was last seen, along the outskirts of Echo Canyon. But with each passing day, the search expanded. Still, there was nothing. No sign of Teresa, no sign of her car. The police questioned friends, acquaintances, and even Teresa's ex-boyfriend, Daniel, who had been one of the last people to see her before she left the party. But no one could provide any helpful information. Daniel had an alibi. He was working late at a gas station. Teresa's other friends were either too drunk to remember the details of the night or had conflicting stories about when she had left. No one seemed to know anything substantial. As days stretched into weeks, the entire town of Echo Canyon came together to search for Teresa. Volunteers lined the streets with posters of Teresa's smiling face, her disappearance now the focal point of every conversation. Every store window, every utility pole, and every church bulletin board was plastered with missing person flyers. The town was shaken by the realization that someone as beloved and well-known as Teresa could simply vanish. Neighbors and strangers alike joined the search efforts. They formed search parties and scoured every inch of the desert, hoping for even the smallest sign of Teresa. The sense of unity in the community was palpable. Everyone was pulling together, but the fear was unmistakable. People had no answers, and the longer the search went on, the more they realized how little they actually knew about the circumstances surrounding Teresa's disappearance. Even as they searched, doubt began to set in. The mystery of Teresa's disappearance hung over the town like a heavy fog. The town's sense of security had been shattered. The thought that someone or something had taken Teresa from them was too much to bear. And as the search continued with no answers, that fear grew stronger. Days passed. Still nothing. No clues. No new leads. The investigation, which had started with such urgency, had now become a haunting reminder of the unknown. What had happened to Teresa? Had she been taken by someone? Or had something more sinister occurred? And worse, the longer they searched, the more they realized that no one had seen her after she left the party. The car, the truck, nothing. The authorities had no new information, and the town was running out of places to search. The families of the missing, those who had long waited for answers, began to feel the cold grip of dread as they realized the truth. They might never find her. No trace, no clues, nothing. The feeling of helplessness began to gnaw at everyone. The hope that Teresa would be found, that she would return to her family, faded with each passing day. No one in Echo Canyon wanted to believe it, but the chilling thought was beginning to creep in. What if they never found Teresa? What if she was gone forever? Would the town ever recover from this tragedy? Would they ever find the answers they so desperately needed? The search was ongoing, but it was beginning to feel like a never-ending nightmare. Before we move on, I just want to take a moment to thank all my incredible subscribers for supporting this channel and helping it grow. Your support means the world to me. If you're as invested in this story as I am, please take a second to like this video. Your like lets me know you want more true crime cases like this one. And if you're not subscribed yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the twists and turns in this gripping case. Also, share this with anyone who loves solved cold cases and mysteries. I can't wait to take you deeper into this shocking investigation. Now let's dive into the next part of the story. The years dragged on. By 2021, Teresa's case had officially gone cold. The search had dwindled, and the excitement of finding answers had faded. The town of Echo Canyon had moved on, but not her parents. Elena and Roberto Vega refused to let go. Every evening, the porch light stayed on, a silent vigil. The light was all they had left. It was a beacon, a symbol of hope. But hope over time had become fragile. The grief had hardened. The years had passed. But the pain had never stopped. They were still waiting for Teresa, still hoping for a miracle. But that hope, quiet and constant, was fading like the desert sun. Then in 2021, a breakthrough, a twist no one saw coming. New forensic technology had advanced. What once seemed impossible was now achievable. DNA analysis, forensic genealogy, a method so powerful it could unearth secrets buried for decades. The case was revisited. Old evidence was re-examined. A piece of Teresa's car, the airbag, was discovered. It had been overlooked, but not anymore. This was the spark the investigation needed. The piece that had slipped through the cracks. The DNA found on that airbag led to something that no one expected. A name. That name? Ethan Mitchell, a trusted mechanic in Echo Canyon, a friendly neighbor. Everyone knew him. Everyone trusted him. He was a fixture in the community. But now the pieces of the puzzle were pointing to him. How had they missed it? How had they missed him? Ethan's DNA on the airbag. The connection was undeniable. A man who had lived in the town for years. A man who had been in Teresa's life, but in ways no one had suspected. The name Ethan Mitchell had remained buried for years. But now it was resurfacing with a terrifying truth. How could the mechanic, the neighbor, the trusted figure, be hiding such a monstrous secret? What had he been hiding all along? What had the community missed? How far did his obsession with Teresa go? And what had he done? The mystery that had lingered for 2 decades now seemed closer to being solved, but it was far from over. What had Ethan Mitchell been hiding? The answers, though close, were still a long way off. But the truth was coming. Slowly, but it was coming. The deeper Detective Sarah Ramirez dug into Ethan Mitchell's life, the darker it became. She and her team sifted through years of public records, interviews, and any piece of information they could find. What seemed like an open and shut case at first, just another missing person, had turned into something far more twisted. Ethan Mitchell wasn't the quiet, kind neighbor everyone had thought him to be. He wasn't just the mechanic who always lent a helping hand, who fixed cars with a smile and waved at everyone on his way to work. No, there was more to him than that. The picture they painted of Ethan wasn't what anyone in Echo Canyon had seen. They knew the friendly mechanic, the man who seemed to always be available for help. But they had never seen the man behind the facade. As Detective Ramirez's team uncovered more about his background, the details became unsettling. Ethan had been obsessed with Teresa for years. This wasn't just a chance encounter or a random act of violence. No, it had been building, a twisted obsession that had festered under the surface. The community trusted him. He was always there, lending his services to anyone in need, offering advice, and showing up to community events. But what they didn't know was that behind that charming smile, Ethan was manipulating his way into Teresa's life. Every small detail, every event, every opportunity he had, he used it to insert himself into her world. He had watched her from afar, even when she didn't know it. He had carefully crafted a way to make himself an irreplaceable part of her daily life, a neighbor who could fix things, a mechanic who could help. Every piece of his life, from his job to his presence in the community, gave him the perfect cover. Ethan had turned his kindness into a weapon, a tool of manipulation. He used his role in the community to keep his obsession hidden from everyone. The town had never suspected a thing. How many times had he offered to help Teresa with her car? How many times had he fixed her truck just because she needed it? How many times had he smiled, waved, and pretended to be an innocent bystander in her life? No one had thought to look deeper. No one had seen the dangerous man hiding behind the mask of a helpful neighbor. As Detective Ramirez's team continued to dig, they began to see the true depth of Ethan's connection to Teresa. It wasn't just the occasional favor or a neighborly smile. No, it was far darker than that. Ethan had been leaving anonymous letters to Teresa, letters that started as innocent messages of friendship, but over time became more controlling, more obsessive. He had inserted himself into her life little by little, sometimes in ways that no one could have even imagined. At first, his letters seemed harmless. A note here, a note there. But over time, they escalated. What had started as harmless notes of care became a dark expression of control. Ethan wasn't just a man in the background of Teresa's life. He was there, manipulating every moment, every interaction. He wasn't just the mechanic down the road. He was a predator who had waited for years to make his move. The chilling part? No one knew. No one had suspected. Ethan had been the one who was always there, the one who cared for Teresa. He had slipped into her life so quietly it was impossible to see it coming. Teresa, like everyone else in Echo Canyon, had believed Ethan was just another kind face in the crowd. But there was more. Ethan wasn't just a neighbor. He was a man hiding in plain sight, his obsession running deeper than anyone could have imagined. He wasn't some stranger who had popped in out of nowhere. He was a fixture in the town, a man trusted by everyone. And that was the problem. What if this wasn't just a random act? What if it wasn't just a disappearance caused by some tragic accident? What if this was planned? What if Ethan had been waiting for the right moment? The truth was becoming clearer with every passing day. But with every discovery, the horror deepened. It wasn't just a disappearance. It was something far more calculated. Something that had been brewing for years, hidden behind a mask of kindness. The kind of mask no one ever thought to peel back. Detective Ramirez couldn't shake the nagging thought in the back of her mind. Ethan's obsession with Teresa, it was methodical. Each step he took, each moment he manipulated, was a calculated move in a sick game. And the question now was, how far had Ethan gone to keep his dark secret hidden? But the deeper they went, the more terrifying the truth became. Every new piece of evidence only made it harder to breathe. What had Ethan been planning all these years? And what had he done to Teresa that night? The truth was getting closer. But even as the pieces fit together, it was clear. There was still so much more to uncover. What had Ethan been hiding? And was there more to this story than anyone could imagine? The investigation had only just begun. The journey into Ethan Mitchell's twisted past was about to uncover a truth no one could have seen coming. The darkness that had been hiding in plain sight was about to be exposed, and it would change everything. Did you see this coming? Ethan Mitchell, the mechanic and trusted neighbor, hiding a dark secret all these years? What do you think about the signs that were missed by the community? Share your thoughts below. I read and respond to every comment. And where are you watching from? It's always so interesting to see where my viewers are from. The quiet morning air was pierced by the sound of sirens, red and blue lights reflecting off the dry desert roads, as the unthinkable was about to unfold in the small, peaceful town of Echo Canyon. Ethan Mitchell, once seen as the friendly, helpful neighbor, was about to be arrested for a crime that had haunted this town for 2 decades. The man everyone trusted, the one who had fixed cars, greeted neighbors with a smile, and showed up to every community event, was now a suspect in Teresa Vega's disappearance. As the police arrived at his modest home, there was no scene of struggle, no loud confrontation. Ethan, surprisingly calm, stepped outside in his worn flannel shirt, his eyes cold and steady. His face remained neutral, as if he had been expecting this moment. "Ethan Mitchell, you're under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Teresa Vega," an officer said firmly. But Ethan didn't react. He didn't shout. He didn't struggle. He simply denied it all. "I didn't do anything," he insisted. "I don't know what you're talking about." There was no panic, no signs of guilt, only a cold indifference, as if he was resigned to the inevitable. as if the years of hiding in plain sight had taught him how to maintain control over his emotions. It was chilling, to say the least. He didn't even look surprised. News of Ethan's arrest spread through Echo Canyon like wildfire. First whispers in the local coffee shop, then the steady stream of reporters with cameras. The townspeople, many still in shock from the previous night's events, couldn't believe what was happening. Ethan Mitchell, the man who had volunteered in the search for Teresa, the one who had lent a hand when others needed help, was now being escorted out of his own home in handcuffs. The small town where everyone knew everyone else was stunned. For years, they had all thought of Ethan as the kind, harmless mechanic, the neighbor who helped without asking for anything in return. How could this man, this trusted man, have been hiding something so dark for so long? It felt like the ground had shifted beneath them. Echo Canyon had always been a place where people left their doors unlocked, where neighbors looked out for each other. And now the reality that someone they had all trusted could be capable of something so heinous was tearing at the fabric of their community. There was disbelief, shock, and a deep sense of betrayal. "How could we have missed it?" whispered one of Ethan's longtime neighbors, eyes wide in disbelief as she stood outside her home, watching the arrest unfold. For some, the idea that they had trusted him so completely was unbearable. It wasn't just the residents of Echo Canyon who were struggling to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the one now being arrested. It was Teresa's family, too. Elena and Roberto Vega, who had spent 20 years living with the haunting absence of their daughter, had been waiting for answers. But this wasn't what they had imagined. To know that someone so close to them had been behind their daughter's disappearance, someone they had trusted, someone who had even helped in the search, was a painful realization. They had never suspected Ethan. They had welcomed him into their lives, shared meals with him, had friendly conversations. But now it felt like their world had been turned upside down. How could they have missed it? How could they have let someone so sinister into their home, into their hearts, without seeing the danger lurking beneath the surface? For 20 years, Ethan Mitchell had lived among them, hidden in plain sight. No one had ever thought to question his role in their town, in their lives. He had been the neighbor you could rely on, the friendly mechanic who always helped, the man who showed up at every town event. His face was familiar, his presence unremarkable, but the truth had been hiding in plain sight, and now it was exposed. How had he managed to deceive so many for so long? What else had he been hiding? The arrest was a shocking revelation, but it was only the beginning. Because now, with the truth coming to light, the questions kept piling up, each more troubling than the last. How could someone so deeply ingrained in the community hide such a monstrous secret? Had everyone been blind to the signs? Or had Ethan truly been able to mask his obsession for 2 decades? The town was left grappling with the terrifying realization that a trusted figure, someone who had been there through thick and thin, was capable of such evil. The truth had been buried for years, but now it was out in the open, and the community was left to pick up the pieces. And yet, there was still so much more to uncover. What had really happened to Teresa that night? What had driven Ethan to do the unthinkable? The pieces were starting to fall into place, but there was still a long road ahead, one filled with dark secrets and unanswered questions. The arrest was just the beginning. What lay ahead was a deeper dive into Ethan Mitchell's life and the twisted truth that had been hiding beneath the surface all along. As the investigation continued, Detective Sarah Ramirez and her team delved deeper into the forensic evidence that would ultimately seal Ethan Mitchell's fate. This was the moment that the case, which had plagued Echo Canyon for 20 years, would finally begin to unravel, and the truth, long buried, would rise to the surface. Forensic science, the same science that had remained unavailable all those years ago, became the key to solving Teresa's disappearance. The breakthrough came when forensic experts, using the most advanced DNA technology, re-examined the bloodstains and fibers that had been collected from Teresa's car. The evidence was irrefutable. Ethan's DNA was found in Teresa's car, his blood mingled with hers, a chilling confirmation of his presence at the crime scene. But that wasn't all. In addition to the bloodstains, investigators uncovered fibers in the vehicle that could only have come from Ethan's clothing. The fibers, microscopic and once overlooked, were now examined under advanced forensic light, revealing their unmistakable match to the fabric of Ethan's jacket. The pieces of the puzzle were finally fitting together. The DNA and fibers connected Ethan Mitchell to Teresa's car to the very moment of her abduction. What had once been circumstantial evidence, a whisper of suspicion, had now become concrete, undeniable proof. Ethan Mitchell, the mechanic everyone trusted, the man who had been present at every community gathering, had left traces of his guilt behind. But there was still one more piece of the puzzle, one that had been sitting in plain sight for years, yet no one had ever considered it significant. Teresa's anonymous letters. For years, Teresa had received a series of letters, strange, unsettling letters that she had kept hidden from her family. They were odd, cryptic, and always signed by a nameless sender. At first, Teresa had thought they were harmless, just the musings of someone obsessed. But as the letters kept arriving, each one more intrusive, more unnerving than the last, she began to feel a sense of dread. The letters were an eerie manifestation of Ethan's obsession. He had been manipulating Teresa from the shadows, inserting himself into her life in a way that no one could see. Each letter, with its veiled threats and possessive undertones, had been a step in his attempt to control her. At the time, Teresa had dismissed the letters. She told herself it was just a lonely person with a fascination, someone she could easily ignore. But in retrospect, those letters were more than just words. They were Ethan's way of planting seeds of fear, his way of asserting his power over her. They were his first attempts to manipulate her into feeling unsafe, to push her into a corner where she might feel compelled to turn to him for comfort. Now the investigators saw those letters for what they really were, a direct link to Ethan Mitchell. They had been dismissed as nothing more than a nuisance at the time, but now with the full picture emerging, they were the key to understanding Ethan's twisted obsession. The letters painted a disturbing picture. They showed how Ethan had carefully woven himself into the fabric of Teresa's life, all while hiding his true intentions behind a facade of kindness and trustworthiness. They revealed the lengths he had gone to control her, to keep her isolated and under his thumb. With every new discovery, the case grew darker. Each piece of evidence that came to light only deepened the mystery, and the more they uncovered, the more twisted the story became. The DNA, the fibers, and now the letters, they were all part of a much larger, much darker story. Ethan Mitchell wasn't just a neighbor. He wasn't just a trusted mechanic in the town of Echo Canyon. He was a man with a terrifying obsession, a man who had spent years manipulating the people around him and hiding his true nature beneath a mask of kindness and community involvement. The investigation was closing in on Ethan, and the evidence was overwhelming. Yet the question still lingered. How far had his obsession gone? How much of Teresa's life had he really controlled? How much of her life had he been silently manipulating from the shadows? The truth was becoming undeniable. Ethan Mitchell had been hiding in plain sight for years, and now the darkness that had festered in the town for so long was finally being exposed. But despite the damning evidence, there were still questions left unanswered. Why had Ethan's obsession with Teresa grown so much? What had driven him to take such a violent, horrific step? What had truly happened to Teresa that night? And was this the end? Or was there more to uncover about Ethan's hidden past? The investigation was nearly finished, but the full scope of Ethan's depravity was still unclear. Each new piece of evidence only deepened the mystery, and as the investigation reached its boiling point, the town of Echo Canyon was left to grapple with the terrifying realization that their beloved mechanic, the man who had been a fixture in their community for years, was capable of such evil. But the darkest part of this case was still to come. The pieces of the puzzle were almost complete, but what other chilling revelations were lurking just beneath the surface? What had Ethan been hiding all along? The truth was closer than ever, but it was still only half told. After years of waiting, the case that had haunted Echo Canyon for 2 decades finally moved into the courtroom. The trial had arrived, where justice would be fought and a family would finally find out whether they could receive the closure they had been desperately searching for. The courtroom was packed with residents from Echo Canyon, who had watched this case unfold for years. Some had followed the investigation from the very beginning, while others, who had once trusted Ethan Mitchell, now watched with bated breath as the man they knew as their neighbor and mechanic stood in the defendant's seat. The tension in the room was palpable as the judge called the case to order and the battle for justice began. The prosecution, led by the experienced district attorney, was prepared. The evidence they had gathered over the years, from the DNA found in Teresa's car to the chilling anonymous letters left behind by Ethan, was damning. They had a clear case, one that linked Ethan Mitchell directly to the crime. But Ethan's defense team wasn't about to let this happen without a fight. The defense's strategy was clear from the outset. They would attack the DNA evidence. They would raise doubt about its reliability, hoping to plant seeds of uncertainty in the jury's mind. Their goal was simple: to make the jury question the evidence, to create just enough doubt to lead to a verdict of not guilty. The prosecution, however, was prepared to stand their ground. They knew this case would be a battle, one that had already stretched on for far too long, but they were ready to fight for Teresa, for her family who had waited so long for justice, for the town of Echo Canyon, where every resident had once trusted Ethan, for the memory of a 19-year-old woman whose life had been taken too soon. The trial was intense. The defense, under the leadership of a sharp, seasoned lawyer, began their argument by focusing on the DNA evidence. "They want you to believe this DNA is irrefutable," the defense attorney said, gesturing toward the evidence table. "But can we really trust it? Can we truly say with certainty that this is Ethan Mitchell's DNA? We have no direct witnesses, no eyewitness accounts. This is just a collection of biological samples." He went on to argue that there were too many variables, too many things that could have gone wrong. Could the DNA be contaminated? Could there be an innocent explanation for why Ethan's blood was found in the car? The prosecution countered every point with cold, hard facts. The DNA was tested multiple times in different labs, with no discrepancies. The fibers from Ethan's clothing, the letters that Teresa had received, all pointed to him, and all of it was too significant to ignore. But the defense wasn't backing down. They poked holes in the timeline. They questioned the accuracy of witness testimony and the integrity of the investigators who had worked on the case. They tried to cast doubt on the forensic analysis and the methods used to retrieve and examine the evidence. The prosecution, though, had one undeniable strength: the letters. In the trial's most emotional moment, they introduced the anonymous letters that Teresa had received. Each letter, filled with twisted language, a mixture of obsession and manipulation, was read aloud in the courtroom. The words spoke for themselves, letters from a man who had hidden in plain sight for years, a man who had been obsessed with Teresa long before she vanished. As the defense tried to discredit the DNA evidence, the prosecution laid bare Ethan's disturbing fixation on Teresa, showing how he had used his position in the community to conceal his actions. The letters, now seen in a new light, painted a chilling picture. These weren't the actions of a well-meaning neighbor. They were the actions of a man consumed by obsession, someone who had inserted himself into Teresa's life in an effort to control her. The courtroom went silent as the final letter was read aloud. It was one of the most revealing of them all, and it contained a disturbing prediction. "You'll be mine soon. You'll understand. You'll see. We're meant to be together." The faces of those in the courtroom shifted, some shocked, some visibly disturbed. How had no one seen this before? How had Ethan Mitchell, kind, generous, and helpful, managed to keep this secret hidden for so long? The jury was torn. On one hand, the evidence was overwhelming: the DNA, the fibers, the letters. But the defense's arguments had planted doubt in their minds. Could this really be enough to convict Ethan Mitchell? Could they trust the forensic evidence? Were they sure that Ethan was the one responsible for Teresa's disappearance? Or had they missed something, some crucial detail that could turn the case on its head? As the prosecution and defense wrapped up their closing arguments, the jury was left with one final question. Would the defense succeed in raising enough doubt to set Ethan free? Or would the overwhelming evidence finally bring justice to Teresa and her family after 20 long years of pain and uncertainty? The jury retired to deliberate. The town of Echo Canyon held its breath, anxiously waiting for a verdict that could bring an end to a nightmare that had lasted for 2 decades. Would the man they had trusted for so long walk free? Or would they finally learn the truth behind Teresa Vega's disappearance? The silence was deafening as the court awaited the decision. How do you think the trial will go from here? Do you think Ethan's defense can plant enough doubt? Or is the evidence too overwhelming? I want to hear your opinions. Comment below. I read and replied to every single one of them. And by the way, where are you watching from today? For 2 decades, Teresa's family had lived with the haunting absence of their daughter. Every day without her was like living in a dream, unable to wake up. But now, sitting in the courtroom, they were forced to confront the reality, the truth they had long feared but hoped never to hear. Elena and Roberto Vega, once a symbol of hope and persistence, now faced a new, deeper pain, the truth. As the trial progressed, the floodgates of their grief opened wide, and they were submerged in the details they had long tried to avoid. Every piece of evidence, every revelation, every word spoken in the courtroom seemed to unravel their souls. The letters, the ones Teresa had received in secret, the ones they had dismissed as harmless, now felt like a cruel prophecy. The thought of Ethan Mitchell, the man who had been so kind, so trusted, now revealed as the orchestrator of their daughter's nightmare, was unfathomable. The courtroom, once filled with anticipation, now felt suffocating. Elena's face twisted in sorrow as the truth poured out, piece by piece. Roberto sat next to her, holding her hand tightly, his eyes red with both anger and disbelief. The sound of his breath felt heavy, as if he was struggling to find any air left in the room. For them, it wasn't just about what happened to Teresa, it was about betrayal. The betrayal of a man who had stood in their home, fixed their broken cars, shared meals with them, all while hiding his darkest secret. Each revelation felt like a knife to their hearts, sharpened by years of waiting, twisting with each truth uncovered. It was one thing to lose a child, but it was an entirely different pain to lose a child to someone you thought you could trust. It was an unfathomable agony, one that twisted the very fabric of their belief in their own community. How could they have been so blind? Tears rolled down Elena's cheeks, her sobs barely audible over the courtroom proceedings. She held her breath as a witness described how Ethan Mitchell had manipulated his way into their lives, gaining their trust while secretly harboring an obsession with their daughter. And the pain of it all? It didn't stop when the trial ended for the day. No, there was no escape. It lingered, gnawing at their hearts, waiting for the next day's revelations. Each day brought new pain, and each day they had to face it, knowing the worst was still to come. The weight of their grief seemed impossible to carry, and yet they had no choice but to bear it, because if they didn't, if they let the pain crush them, they would lose the one thing they still had left: hope. Hope that justice could still be done. Hope that the truth, though painful, would bring the closure they so desperately needed. But it wasn't just Teresa's family who was shattered. The town of Echo Canyon was rocked to its very core. How could it be? How could the man who had been so integral to their small, tight-knit community be capable of such horror? Ethan Mitchell, the trusted neighbor, the mechanic everyone called Good Old Ethan, was now the man who had taken away one of their own. The shockwaves rippled through the streets of Echo Canyon as people began to reconcile the kind, hard-working mechanic they'd known for years with the man now sitting in the defendant's chair. How could this have happened? They had all trusted him. They had all believed he was someone who could be relied upon. But the truth had shattered that illusion. For the residents of Echo Canyon, it wasn't just about Teresa anymore. It was about their own naivety. They had welcomed a monster into their lives without realizing it. They had shared meals, birthdays, and quiet evenings with a man who had been hiding in plain sight. How had they all missed it? How had they failed to see the signs? People who had once called Ethan a friend now whispered behind closed doors. How could they have been so blind? How could they have trusted a man with such a dark secret? They had seen the small signs, the little oddities, the way he seemed too interested in Teresa, the way he lingered in her presence a little too long. But no one had said anything. No one had connected the dots. Now they were left with the consequences of their inaction. They couldn't go back. They couldn't undo the trust they had placed in Ethan Mitchell. And the shame of that realization was almost too much to bear. How many times had they brushed aside their suspicions, chalking them up to nothing more than coincidence? How many red flags had they ignored? Echo Canyon was a town of good people, but now that goodness felt tainted by the knowledge that they had been living side by side with a predator. The darkness that had lived within their community, hidden beneath the surface, had been exposed in a way no one could have ever imagined. Some residents refused to believe it. They couldn't. Ethan had been a part of their lives for too long. He couldn't be the monster they were now being told he was. But others, the ones who had been close to Teresa, the ones who had felt the weight of the loss with her family, knew better. They knew the truth, no matter how much it hurt to admit it. As the trial unfolded, the town's wounds festered. The truth had come out, but it wasn't enough to heal the damage. How could it be? How could the past 2 decades of silence, of unanswered questions, of shattered lives, be undone with one courtroom revelation? The town was left reeling, as the question echoed through the minds of everyone who had once known Ethan Mitchell. How could we have missed it? How could we have trusted him all this time? The truth, while finally revealed, was only the beginning. For the Vega family, for Echo Canyon, and for everyone who had been touched by Teresa's disappearance, the real question remained. Could the damage be undone? Could justice truly heal the wounds that had been inflicted all these years? And with the weight of those unanswered questions pressing down, the town waited, still waiting for the final piece of the puzzle to fall into place. Would they finally get the closure they needed? Or would the pain of betrayal linger forever? The truth had been revealed, but at what cost? The courtroom was silent as the jury foreman stood, papers shaking in his hand. He looked over at the defendant, Ethan Mitchell, sitting motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead, his face betraying nothing. The weight of 2 decades of grief, frustration, and silence hung in the air like a dense fog. The foreman's voice cut through the tension. We, the jury, find the defendant, Ethan Mitchell, guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Teresa Vega. The words landed with a finality that seemed almost impossible to grasp. The room, once thick with uncertainty, now crackled with raw emotion. Teresa's family, Elena and Roberto Vega, sat together, hands tightly clasped. Their faces were a mixture of relief and sorrow. For 20 years they had fought against the darkness, praying for the day when they would finally know what happened to their beloved daughter. And now they had the truth. Ethan Mitchell was guilty. But while the verdict brought them a measure of justice, it also left a chasm in their hearts. A chasm that had only grown wider with the realization of what their daughter had suffered. Elena buried her face in her hands, tears flowing freely as the weight of the years came crashing down. Roberto sat beside her, his eyes bloodshot and tired. But there was a spark of something else in his gaze, a flicker of the hope they'd been holding on to for so long. The verdict had come, but the pain, the loss, it didn't stop there. It never could. The courtroom had already become a place of finality. But in Teresa's parents' hearts, the story was far from over. Their daughter was gone. And the man who had stolen her from them was finally held accountable. But as Elena wiped her tears, her eyes lifted toward Ethan Mitchell, who sat there stoic, almost as if the verdict hadn't even touched him. The relief was there, but it was bitter, painful. Justice had come, yes, but there was something else, something they could never shake, the hollow truth of what they had lost. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with the sound of reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing relentlessly. Ethan Mitchell's guilty verdict had sent shockwaves not just through Echo Canyon, but across the nation. The case had dragged on for 20 long years, but now, thanks to advances in forensic technology DNA analysis, the kind of analysis that had been unthinkable back in 2001, the truth had been brought into the light. The case had reopened a national conversation about cold cases. How many more families were waiting for closure, waiting for justice, just like Teresa Vega's? People across the country were now paying attention, recognizing the power of modern forensic technology in solving crimes that seemed unsolvable. The use of DNA, evidence that had been overlooked, dismissed, and buried for years, had become the key to cracking open a case that no one thought would ever see the light of day. There were those who had written off cold cases, who believed that time made the truth fade. But Teresa's case had proven otherwise. It wasn't just about the science, the forensics, or the relentless pursuit of justice. It was about the persistence of a family that refused to give up. A family that kept the porch light burning, that kept hope alive even in the face of unspeakable grief. As the reporters filed their stories, headlines flashed across the nation. Justice for Teresa Vega, cold case solved after 20 years. The story would live on, both as a triumph of technology and as a stark reminder of the power of persistence. But while the case had been solved, while the justice system had finally given a name to the monster who had stolen Teresa's life, there was still the gnawing question in the back of everyone's mind. What other secrets did Ethan Mitchell still hold? And the question lingered. What had happened to Teresa in those final moments? What had Ethan done to her? Could anyone ever fully understand the depths of his obsession? The courtroom may have closed, but the questions were only beginning to intensify. For 20 years, Teresa's family had lived in limbo, clinging to a flicker of hope that one day they would get answers, that justice would be served. Now that justice had been delivered, the weight of the truth seemed almost unbearable. The conviction was a small piece of closure, but not enough to heal the wounds. The verdict had been delivered. Ethan Mitchell was guilty. But as the days passed, as the town of Echo Canyon began to come to terms with the truth, a disturbing thought gnawed at everyone's consciousness. How had Ethan hidden this dark side for so long? How had he managed to manipulate not just Teresa, but the entire community for years, gaining their trust, embedding himself in their lives, all while harboring such monstrous intentions? The unanswered questions loomed like a shadow over the case. Ethan had been caught, but was the full extent of his involvement revealed? Was he hiding even more secrets? Secrets that could be just as chilling as the ones already uncovered? As Teresa's family tried to come to terms with the finality of the case, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking just out of sight. Something that had been hidden for years. And in the silence of their grief, the truth of what had happened to their daughter was still incomplete. The painful realization that the truth could be so much darker than anyone had ever imagined. Could they truly find peace? Could the people of Echo Canyon ever fully recover from the darkness that had been revealed? Or was there more still to uncover, more secrets that would keep them all trapped in the haunting shadow of what had been done? The case was officially closed, but the ripples of its impact were only just beginning. And with that lingering thought, the question remained. What other truths were waiting to be uncovered? Thank you so much to all my amazing subscribers for supporting the channel and making stories like this one possible. If you found this case as shocking and emotional as I did, please give this video a like. It helps more people discover these unbelievable cold cases. Subscribe to this channel for more unsolved mysteries and cold case stories that bring justice to the victims. Share this with a friend who loves gripping crime stories and turn on that notification bell so you'll be the first to know when I drop another intense case. And if you want to hear more solved cold cases like this one, check out our previous videos on this channel. You won't want to miss them,